Hello, I'm Alex Gupta with UATV. Today I'm speaking with Mr. Paul Hamill, a senior adjunct fellow at the American Security Project in Washington, D.C., and a principal at Logan International Relations. Hello, Mr. Hamill. Welcome to UATV.
Hi, Alex. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, the big news today is we see that Michael Flynn has resigned as National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. What we had, though, on Monday, what happened is we had a situation where the Kremlin publicly defended Mr. Flynn against allegations of treason. Was that the nail in the coffin? Is that what made him leave?
Not quite, Alex. The main reason why Michael Flynn had to resign was the fact that he lied to the vice president and the White House spokesperson. That originally he said he'd not contacted the Russian ambassador to the United States regarding sanctions, where in fact he had done. So that's the main reason why the president fired him. At the same time, there is now congressional action to investigate Michael Flynn on what he actually did say to the Russian ambassador and whether he did offer sanctions relief when, at the same time, he was not yet National Security Advisor. He was technically a private citizen.
In the larger respect, being in D.C., what is the admiration? Why does Trump respect and admire Putin so much?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, as it were. It is a mystery to many here in Washington about this relationship between the President of the United States and the President of Russia. Many here have talked of conspiracies, of whether this dossier a British intelligence officer put together, is there some truth in that? But in reality, I think it is part of Trump's making a deal. It is about the President of the United States trying to reaffirm the United States' relationship with Russia. Whether the President and his team are able to conclude a deal that will work for the United States, that actually remains to be seen. Whether Putin will actually put one over on the President of the United States, that question is still out there.
You obviously work in foreign policy circles. You talk to people at the State Department, the Department of Defense. How much, if at all, does this worry people in the foreign policy establishment in Washington, D.C.?
It is a big worry in the Department of Defense and in the Department of State, as well as the intelligence community, because we don't know what the President of the United States wants. And it's this mystery that is causing frustration in many agencies, and in fact in the United States Congress. What does the President want the relationship with Russia to be? There are obviously issues regarding Syria and the Middle East. There's also issues regarding Europe. And most importantly, there are issues regarding Ukraine. These mysteries that the President has sown here in D.C. is causing great consternation in all the foreign policy agencies of the U.S. government.
Over a week ago, we saw Donald Trump say that we don't know what's happening in eastern Ukraine. We don't know. He was quoted as saying that. But at the same time, we see the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, come down hard on Russia during her first appearance at the UN Security Council. How can you reconcile these two statements?
On the face of it, you cannot reconcile these two statements. But what is clear is that the President is not being briefed properly, is not being given the right information about what is really happening in Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine. And what we've known from the President since he was a well-known TV celebrity and business leader is that he shoots from the hip. He doesn't necessarily get all the facts before he speaks. And so what we're seeing here in D.C. is the education of a president. And luckily, he has surrounded himself in the State Department, in the Department of Defense, in the intelligence community, and with Nikki Haley in the UN, with people who understand the situation and understand that America's credibility is on the line here.
What is your opinion, and what do you hear from people at State Department and in Washington, D.C. regarding Rex Tillerson taking up, the State Department? Is there, fear? Is there anxiety? And what do you think will happen as far as the situation in Ukraine or the U.S. policy towards Ukraine, specifically the conflict in the East?
I think that's a great question, Alex, because I think before Secretary Tillerson was sworn in, there was great misunderstanding about him. There was anxiety about what his feelings were on the energy side, on climate change, on relations with Russia and Ukraine. But I think since we've seen after his swearing in, he is come across as a thinker in these matters and has taken a step back to look at the bigger picture. We mustn't forget, Secretary Tillerson ran one of the biggest companies in the world for many years. He understands the complex nature of foreign policy, and he's dealt with foreign policy at the very highest levels. And he has said during his confirmation process, and as well as to senators in private, that he puts American interests first. And I think that's what we will see from Secretary Tillerson going forward.
You mentioned Congress earlier. How much sway do people like John McCain, Senator John McCain, Senator Lindsey Graham, people who are anti-Putin, how much sway do they have with the Trump agenda and the Trump administration?
Quite frankly, it depends on Senator McCain, Senator Graham, Senator Rubio. Right now, they've talked a lot on this issue. They've talked a lot about putting new sanctions on Russia. They've talked a lot about making sure that the president cannot remove sanctions that are already there. They actually haven't done anything yet. And it remains to be seen whether these senators will actually do anything on this matter. I hope they do.
You mentioned in your latest article, you talked about how Trump, he works in the art of the deal, his negotiating process, his bargaining process, and you mentioned that countries really need to, when they negotiate with Trump, when they try and strike a deal with him, they have to put America's, or they have to see it as Trump's view, putting America's interests first. And any country that comes to the bargaining table with Trump needs to realize this. So what kind of deal do you see Ukraine ideally making with Trump? What would be in their best interest?
Yeah, well, Ukraine has to show that that they need America to be their partner, and by being their partner, Ukraine will help the United States. How will Ukraine be a partner in global stability? How will Ukraine help America in trade and in energy? These are the things the Ukrainian government needs to think about when it deals with the president. As we've seen over this last weekend, the Japanese Prime Minister came here to the United States and worked very well with the president, because that's what he did. He talked about how Japan would be able to help the United States first. And it was only then that the president was able to talk about how the United States will help Japan.
Does President Trump, does he does he get provided information from traditional conservative think tanks, such as the Cato Institute and the Rand Corporation?
The think tanks that are going to be very important for this administration are going to be the ones like Heritage and the American Enterprise Institute. Less so the old-style Republican ones of Rand and Cato. It will be about taking forward the president's plan of America First, which is what Heritage and AEI have started to discuss.
Looking forward to the 2008 election, even the 2020 presidential election, Do you see the Democrats really, putting Ukraine or Russian relations on the forefront of their platform?
It's hard to say at this stage. The Democrats are still going through the stages of grief and shock of losing the last election. And don't forget, they were expected to take the Senate as well. So they lost the presidential election, they lost the Senate election, and they lost a lot of seats at state level. So they've still got a lot of thinking and heartache to get through before they come out with this. I think that the issues with Russia, with China, and in the Middle East are going to be incredibly important for the Democrats going forward. The midterm elections of 2018 won't really be based around foreign policy. But you can see with the people in the Democratic Party who are starting to become leaders, they will start to talk about Russia. They will start to bring in the differences that the Republican Party has with President Trump on Russia.
What do you see in the near future as far as in Ukraine, specifically the conflict in eastern Ukraine? What do you see happening in the near future, let's say in the next 1 to 2 years?
Well, I think it's very important for the Ukrainian government and the supporters of Ukraine to get the message out here in America about what is going on. Quite frankly, the news isn't getting out here. That the actions that Russia is taking in eastern Ukraine is not being reported here in the United States. And I think it's going to be incredibly important for those who support a free, democratic Ukraine to get the story out here. And it's only with that we can see the United States working with its allies to try and help the Ukrainian government.
And my last question is an economic question. We see Brexit just happen in Great Britain, and there's a high chance that other countries may leave the EU. What are the consequences for Ukraine, for East Europe, even the Baltic states in general? What do you see happening with that?
I think it remains to be seen whether actually Brexit will turn out to be a deep, hard cut that the present UK government is pursuing. I think there'll be a great realization about how positive the European Union has been on the people of Britain and the people of Europe. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the European Union has helped Eastern Europe tremendously over the last 10 to 15 years. It mustn't be forgotten where Eastern Europe was just after the breakup of the Soviet Union. So it is incumbent on all of Eastern Europe to show how the European Union is this flagship of freedom and democracy. And this will have an impact on Ukraine because it's important to bring Ukraine into the wider European economic area.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Hamill. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm Alex Gupta with UATV.